My name is Kira vom Eigen, and my topic is the asbestos tragedy in Wittenoom, Australia. The objectives of today's presentation are to learn about the key events which led to the closure of the town of Wittenoom. We will also understand the scope of the asbestos contamination in Wittenoom and become informed of the dangers of asbestos and learn about the health outcomes of those who were exposed to asbestos at Wittenoom. Lastly, we will learn about the aftermath and cleanup efforts at Wittenoom. This is a table of contents of today's presentation. We will see a timeline of the key events, a map of Wittenoom. We will go over Wittenoom asbestos exposures, including the tons of asbestos mined by site and the population exposed. We will go through the dangers of asbestos and the health effects of exposure, as well as the health outcomes of those who were exposed at Wittenoom. Lastly, we will go through the cleanup efforts and summary. Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral in the environment, and it is mined for use as insulation due to its heat-resistant properties. In Wittenoom, blue asbestos was mined, which is a type of asbestos that is particularly hazardous. In 1943, blue asbestos begins being mined in Wittenoom. And by 1946, the first known case of asbestosis was identified. Throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s, mine inspections continually report excessive dust conditions. By 1960, the first mesothelioma case is identified from Wittenoom. In 1966, the last operating mine was closed due to economic factors, and by 1978, the government announced the closure of the town due to the extreme contamination and hazardous conditions. Wittenoom is located in Western Australia, about 870 miles from the city of Perth. Here we have a map of the Wittenoom site, including the mines and town site. The three main mines were the Wittenoom mine, the Colonial mine, and the Yampire mine. You can see here that the town site is located very close to all three mines. Here we have a pie chart of the tons of blue asbestos fiber which was mined between 1943 and 1966. The majority of asbestos fiber was mined from the Colonial mine, about 130,000 tons. Next, the Wittenoom mined about 20,000 tons, followed by the Yampire mine, which produced about 300 tons of asbestos fiber. The conditions at Wittenoom were extremely dangerous. In 1948, dust levels were monitored at 6 to 8 times safe levels. In 1954, mine inspectors reported excessive asbestos dust in Wittenoom, and clouds of dust can routinely be seen rising from the mill and blowing towards the town. The men who worked in the mines were subject to very dangerous conditions. They worked in dark, narrow tunnels under the ground with little to no surface air, which means that they were breathing asbestos dust for the majority of the day. The exact numbers of people exposed at Wittenoom are not known, but it is estimated that over 20,000 people lived in Wittenoom during the time when asbestos was actively mined. You can see that the population steadily increased from 1940s and then quickly dropped off in 1966 when the last Wittenoom mine was closed. Since then, the population has steadily declined, and the government has since closed the town, and today the residents are under 10. When asbestos is breathed, tiny fibers can easily get stuck in the lungs where they damage the lungs over time. Asbestosis is a scarring of the lungs, which is caused from breathing in asbestos fibers. People with asbestosis also have a higher risk of developing other serious conditions, such as lung cancer and mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is an aggressive and fatal cancer of the lining of the lungs, and it is almost exclusively related to asbestos exposure. When asbestos fibers are introduced to the vagina, ovaries, and cervix, there is also an increased risk for gynecologic cancers. Asbestos fibers can be introduced in this way through sexual intercourse. Pleural disease is also seen, which is a thickening of the pleural or fluid buildup around the lungs, which can lead to breathing problems. The University of Western Australia has followed a cohort of people since the mine closed. The cohort consists of 6,485 men and 410 women. In the workers cohort, 94% are male and 6% are female. In the residents cohort, 48% are male and 51% are female. These people were likely the spouses and children of mine workers. Cancer incidences have been recorded since 1982, and you can see that the highest number of cases were lung cancer at 497 in the workers cohort, which was about 7.2%, and 103 in the residents cohort, which was about 2%. Next, malignant mesothelioma affected about 373 people in the workers cohort and 158 in the residents cohort. This was followed by laryngeal cancer, which saw about 35 cases in the workers and 7 in the residents. Lastly, ovarian cancer affected 5 people in the workers cohort and 22 people in the residents cohort. Today, 3 million tons of asbestos tailing litter Wittenoom across the site. Due to the vast extent of the contamination and the deadly risks associated, very little has been done by the government to clean up the site. Homes and buildings have been demolished, and people have been forced to move out of the town. Between 1943 and 1966, extensive asbestos mining occurred in Wittenoom. The conditions were extremely dangerous and uncontrolled for mine workers as well as the residents of the town. Over 3 decades, tens and thousands of men, women, and children were exposed to these deadly asbestos dust fibers. Since that time, thousands have become ill and died from the asbestos-related diseases after exposure at Wittenoom. Though the town has been shut down by the government and everyone has moved out, the land still remains heavily contaminated and it is extremely dangerous to visit. This tragedy is a reminder of the occupational risks of asbestos and the importance of protecting mining workers.